Hi, folks. Welcome to Film Optimists, where we talk about all things film with a hefty dose of optimism. I'm your co-host, Seth Boyd.
And I'm Megan Tierney. And folks, you're in for a treat. Today is our highly anticipated for us Christmas episode. So, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to everyone. And we're going to be recommending an offshoot holiday film today that we both really enjoyed. Seth brought it into my life, as he will tell you, as it impacted his life, and had nice parallels to the Christmas season, but it's also, like I said, kind of an off-kilter Christmas movie. It is not Miracle on 34th Street, anything like that. So we are so excited to be talking today about Tokyo Godfathers. Is it Godfather?
Godfathers, plural.
Godfathers, plural.
Yes.
Which this shows you, everybody, how ill-versed I am in this movie. But what a treat it was. I watched it last night. Pers are talking about this recording, and it was a treat. It's very, very, like I said, off kilter of Christmas. And Seth, I think a great way to get into it is if you would let us know about how it came into your life and why this recommendation.
Sure, absolutely. So the film is a 2003 Japanese anime film by anime legend Satoshi Kon, who I think is most widely known globally for making Paprika, which we're probably going to talk more about later. And I definitely came into this film by knowing Satoshi Kon from Paprika, but this movie hits home to me because I was homeless for a couple of years, on and off, and I was definitely homeless during the holidays. And it's not something you see depicted that often in media. It's especially not something you see the main characters as homeless and are not judged for it. Typically, if a character is homeless in a Western media, it's a pulled himself up by the britches type of story. This is not really that. So I really enjoy this representation in media. This hits home. This is a very sweet movie. This is also a darkly comic movie. It's a very strange movie in general. It's a Satoshi Kon movie. Let's dive in. I love, Megan, you watched this the first time. This has been a staple in my household. This is maybe the only thing I watch every year and has been for about the last 5 years or
Is this your
so.
Christmas
This
movie,
is there's a
Seth?
few other things we try to get in there, but this is the regular one that Anne and I watch.
Oh, I
So
love that.
I'm deeply familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
I should state real quick, if it seems familiar, let's just say the general premise. The premise is three homeless people stumble upon a newborn infant on Christmas Eve. So got to do something about that. That's the main premise. A little bit of quick background. It is inspired by a John Ford movie, a 48 Western starring John Wayne, of course, about three outlaws who inadvertently, unexpectedly become the godfather to a baby and have to deal with that,
Oh,
which is
wow.
itself based off a 1913 novel. So this is very different from that. It's just the general premise of a trio, an unlikely trio, becomes responsible for a child. But there's some older history in here, some older references.
Mm-hmm.
But what were your kind of impressions as a first-time viewer to this one?
I enjoyed it. Right off the bat, of course, I enjoyed it. I think that in reflecting on it, I also reflected that Christmas oddly is this weird time of melancholy. So
Mm-hmm.
the film is very melancholic, and themes of I think misanthropes and melancholy tend to really come up in Christmas movies, funnily enough, Westerns or not.
Right.
And so it's just interesting that it came up that it came up so I think that it's one of the main themes in this movie is melancholy and life reflections, which is a big common Christmas motif, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
And to have it be through the lens of specifically these homeless people or people without homes lens is
Mm-hmm.
really, really it turns it on its head and makes it definitely a focal point for me. But also I enjoyed that it wasn't really this soapbox for
Right.
homelessness, and there are also just complex characters in itself of people have substance abuse issues, people have
Right.
these people have transgenderism and gender
Mm-hmm.
identity things going on, but it's not a soapbox for issues like that. It's just these are these characters, which
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
loved.
I think that's really true. And again, going back to feeling, identifying with this movie is like, it doesn't make a grand statement about here's how we solve the homelessness problem.
That's
It
right.
doesn't make a grand statement about here's how to be a trans person and be an advocate for that in the
That's
workplace,
right.
or to battle alcoholism. But I think it really honors these characters just by depicting them as real people,
Hmm.
and I frankly think that's among the best ways to show representation. I'm a bisexual man. I enjoy movies where characters just happen to be queer rather than
Yeah,
give a soapbox statement about
that's
life
right.
as a queer person. That's my personal opinion. I understand people might disagree, but I think this movie does really well by giving these characters a lot of dignity, a lot of grace, simply by existing. But let's get into the protagonist,
Hmm.
because among the things I really like about this movie, like you said, is a lot of things are kind of flipped on their head.
Hmm.
This is not an overtly Christian nation. Like Christmas in Japan is not quite the same as Christmas in the U.S. We do
That's right.
begin with them at a very familiar setting for I think a lot of people, which is the soup kitchen. You
That's
have
right.
to hear the sermon
The nativity
first, the
play.
nativity play. You have to sit through that before you can eat.
Yeah,
And I
that's
say
right.
very familiar to everybody, familiar to me, but I think
Mm,
we're all familiar with what that's like. But I've been on both ends of that,
right.
and I always love the frustrations of what are you really thinking if you're just there and you're just hungry and cold and you have
Hmm.
to sit through that crap. Say what you will about religion, but you're not that interested in an all-powerful God
Yeah,
telling you how things
yeah.
could be better
The
when
Christmas
things are
story,
not better. Yeah,
baby
so like this,
Jesus. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like Christmas is involved. There's a lot of Christmas throughout here. There's a lot of Christian references and etc. But also like our
Hmm.
characters are now like Hana is a character we'll get to in a moment who maybe wants to believe, or at least is more open to
Yeah,
miracles.
that's
But
right.
this is not we get the feeling this is not the thing they practice necessarily. So
Hmm.
our three protagonists are Jin, who is an older alcoholic man. I don't think we get quite exactly an age for them. I'm guessing my understanding was maybe like 40s to 50s,
Yeah, middle
um,
aged.
middle aged, yeah.
Hmm.
And then Hana, who is a trans woman, and Miyuki, who I think is
Hmm.
like 16 or 17,
Uh-huh.
who's a teenage runaway. All three of these characters are would be outsiders even if they weren't homeless, or at least they'd be characters who are to varying degrees disregarded by society.
Hmm.
Society is not really designed to help or function for a teenager, a trans person, or an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And we see that we see them getting beyond poor treatment for being homeless. We see them encountering that.
Sorry, folks, we were having a little technical difficulties as these things go. But Seth, you were mentioning how these characters, our main characters in the story, we have three main characters, and they are not your typical. They're not your typical bunch. First of all, like that's kind of the point of like having these three people together. But they're also not your typical stereotypical, as most often is, portrayals of like homeless people in general or people without homes. So they provide a wide array of like their own characteristics and their own personalities that come to it. And for me, that was obviously a huge win of the movie. That's where it shines. But do
Yes.
you want to talk about like that aspect too, Seth?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think right before that we were having level difficulties. We're getting into each of these characters, aside from being homeless, is still a marginalized person. And Miyuki is a teenage runaway, and being a teenager in general, society is not all that concerned with a teenage woman, unfortunately, as we see throughout this movie. And then Hana is a trans woman who is often being misgendered, often being disrespected, and is dealing with what you would expect comes with that as well. And then Jin is a alcoholic, and which I think is important to frankly have in there. It's again, being homeless before, it's not too difficult to link those two. The reliance on a drug or anything of a substance is pretty normal given the circumstances. And none of these characters are judged for that, which I think is especially interesting, given that Jin is not really judged for being an alcoholic so much by the movie. There's maybe by characters, but no one is presented as lost cause or beyond redemption. And as this movie goes on, we see all three of them are very, very capable of extraordinary things, and certainly not things society would expect of them.
I love how like they're portrayed very realistically, and in addition to that, also realistically in terms of like how the public treats people without
Yeah,
homes, like homeless people. And
right.
it's a sad reality, but it's just like that adds to them as like as characters and as believable characters.
Yeah,
I also like that some Hannah, as we talked about, has like a bit of a more affinity towards mysticism, as you were, or like
yes.
at least like a sense of like Christmas
Yeah,
magic.
yeah,
She really wants to believe in that, and so I like that it's very very sweet to me that the movie peppers in instances where that does come true for her. So it's not like a totally bleak, magic is dead kind
right.
of movie. It's actually very like sweet and giving in that way, and it like
Yeah,
it peppers it in a realistic way where it's so heartfelt. It's like a very characteristic of this movie, and it's very very like palpable almost. It's really fun.
and it leads to one of my favorite jokes in the movie is Hannah really wants to be a mother and is talking about this, and is talking about this as she goes up to get her soup and just says, hey, you know what, I'm pregnant, I'm eating for two, you better give me a double portion.
That's right.
And the old person giving soup is confused by this, doesn't know what to do, doesn't really say anything. And then the next day sees Hannah holding the baby, and they don't make eye contact, but just leans over the rail. I was like, oh my God, it was a miracle. She has a
Yes.
baby.
Yeah, that's right.
So you do kind of have multiple characters believing in magic or God or whichever, this
Hmm.
kind of holiday magic. And yeah, it is very nice that we have a person, and it's not necessarily the person you think it is, because Miyuki is the youngest. You think maybe they'd be the most optimistic, and they are often even more jagged or jaded than Jin. It definitely leads to the question of how these folks find each other, because
Hmm.
Jin and Hannah are known. We have a few other homeless characters refer to Miyuki as, oh, that's the kid who hangs out with Jin and Hannah.
Yeah.
We get to see the feeling as we learn more about those stories that they've been out there for years, at
Right.
least,
So
maybe even decades.
it's kind of like Miyuki is outcast in this band of outcasts.
Yes,
Almost.
absolutely.
Or it's almost that feeling of like you can't hang, you're
Yeah,
really not a part of this. You're doing this because of, I think there's some judgment of like you're doing this because of choice. You have a cushy life that you could go to, but of course the movie reveals that like her life circumstances, that's actually like not the case for her at home
yeah,
because of her
yeah,
actions. So I just
exactly.
love that they set these characters up to show you a kind of how they got there, and it unfolds as the movie goes along so beautifully. But it's like it's not right off the bat that you get
Yeah,
that these.
you get a lot of false starts too as to
That's
what
right.
happened, especially with Jin. You get some fake stories about what happened, which is two things I think this movie gets really well about: found family,
Yeah.
which as a homeless person and other family stuff, very important to me. As
Yes.
someone is strange, found family is a thing I rely on. It's a beautiful, wonderful thing. I always enjoy it depicted in fiction, and often it's a little bit more wholesome in fiction than it is in reality. You still have the same problems you have with family. You still have bickering,
Yeah.
and these folks are bickering a lot in some mean ways. Jin is they're all kind of taking shots at each other, especially when they are aggravated and they don't know if they're going to be able to eat. And then they discover the baby, and at altered times they're still bickering, but they are united on like, well, we got to do something about this,
Right.
And I think I really appreciate that depiction of like even the found family is not necessarily the ideal family. You
Yeah.
still have the common problems, and I think it's still better,
Of course.
but it's there.
And certainly realistic. Like it's realistic, but
Yeah,
also in that realism of their harsh life is always like that very very sweet quality of just finding being tough with each other, but it's like tough love. Like
yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's portrayed so well.
But a detail I love is like, again, while they're bickering, while they're arguing, they actually find the baby while they're looking for a present for Miyuki,
That's
um,
right.
who's kind of complaining about like, because they're looking for a collection of books that they've
Hmm.
found, and we're kind of stashing. They're trying to find it and then go through the garbage. They find the baby, and she's being kind of typical teenager saying, "I don't want books. What do I want these old books?" And I think it's specifically Dostoevsky that they were looking for, which big Dostoevsky
Ah,
fan, so appreciate
that's
that as
right.
well. So I like that they're even while they're arguing, they still are arguing while trying to do something nice for each other,
Yeah. Hmm.
which feels
And
very family.
they fed each other, like
Yeah,
they brought food up to her from
right.
the soup kitchen. So it's like at least they're very much banded together in this
Yeah,
movie, which is really,
and
really nice.
I think one thing I want to make sure we highlight is that the tone of this movie is unique because it is,
Hmm.
you do have these rough characters, you have this rough circumstance, but it's also a comedy throughout, and it's a very much a screwball comedy. And once they find the baby, things get stranger and stranger as
That's
they
right.
look for it. I don't think we're going to do a quick, or rather, I don't think we're going to do a full plot synopsis, but they go on quite a goose chase
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
find the baby. They end up finding somebody trapped under a car. They help that person. That person ends up being a Yakuza boss. They go end up
Hmm.
being invited to the wedding. There's another lead there, and then there's an assassination tip at the wedding, and it just kind of goes on from there in a way that you don't see in movies very much.
Right.
Uh, and I like screwball comedy. I think it's an underrated um, particular genre that's
Hmm.
mostly from the 30s and 40s. Although um, I think in Western audiences, the most we see it is in Coen Brother movies. Like
Sure.
Fargo
Hmm.
has a lot of elements of screwball
Yeah.
comedy of things going wronger and wronger. So this movie has that in a very fun, whimsical way, all while having this very tragic thing of there's a baby that's been abandoned, and
Right.
it's a good mystery too. I think it functions very well as they got the clues, they slowly put together where this
It
baby come from.
it does. It's so engaging in in that regard, and it's like it sets it up very well where that's what I feel like it snowballed into getting better and better. Like sometimes the
Yeah,
plot can get a little like crazy if it happens like that, but this
sure.
one it's just like quality, man. Like I think
Yeah.
animes do this very well, but it's like
Yes.
they can spin and spin and spin until it like really makes a big impact at the end, which is so like satisfying, I guess,
Yeah,
and well done. It's well done.
absolutely. Yeah, I think it's something that lesser hands would be a very ridiculous and unpleasant movie. you
Right.
know
Right, right.
and I don't know if you I can't really pinpoint exactly what is the quality that makes this work, but I will say a big part of it I think is Satoshi Kon's animation, in that
Yeah,
very comedic animation. Like if you're getting those great exaggerated faces from characters,
that's
reactions and
right.
everything, and you're also getting some the stylistic choice he's maybe most known for is his match cuts.
Mm.
And there's a whole great video on YouTube people should check out from Every Frame of Painting on his editing techniques. And they can be very jarring. One of the most intense ones in this movie is there's a pipe with water leaking, and it cuts to blood
Oh
dripping
yeah.
on the floor. And you don't know what's happening yet. And then we start to reveal what happened with Yuki. And sorry for spoilers, is she stabbed her dad. And it's a very jarring cut, and it's not what you're expecting, not where you're expecting the movie to go at all.
Mm.
But that's one of his real mastery. There was that match cut,
Oh
and
man.
there's more throughout. But he's, this is a movie where homeless people find a baby, but this is also a movie where someone stole a baby. It comes out, so where a daughter stabs her dad.
Yep.
A man ran out on his family because he's overwhelmed with debts. Actually, multiple people ran out on their families because they're overwhelmed with debts, and
Wow.
a lot of very intense stuff happens in this movie that I think really works it well with the sentimentality of it. Actually, it makes the sweetness feel very earned.
I realized I interpreted that imagery wrong almost because I think I'm so used to looking for like highly symbolic
Mm,
images and motifs, which obviously that was, but this one for me was also a bit of a more straightforward story. I mean, not obviously we're talking about how it like spun a yarn really crazily, but it's a straightforward storyline in that it like it just keeps building upon each other, and it's not quite like as like surreal as past movies
Paprika.
are. It's
Yeah,
Paprika
yeah,
is what I'm thinking of. So that kind of like surprised me too about it. It was just like I think it's very like obviously character driven story, and the images that are presented are extremely pointed. Like they're very specific to these characters, I guess. And I thought that blood scene was almost I didn't realize that that was in regards to her father. Almost, that was my like miss.
And I think part of it is too, and I like this animation details. It's her and it's her voice, but she's larger.
Yeah,
She's in that scene. She's somewhat, I wouldn't say overweight, but she is fuller bodied,
that's right.
and which I think speaks well. Like we find out she's been on the streets with him for I think it's 6 months. So she does look like someone who went from being fed family dinners
That's
to
right.
scrounging, you know.
Yes.
But yeah, and I think this is a interesting. Like I think she's 17. I can't remember. I know she's not graduated high school, but she she stabs her father in anger, thinking he's gotten rid of the cat, and turns out he didn't. So
Whoops.
yeah, and which is something she finds out much later, I think, and doesn't feel like she can show her face there.
Yeah.
And that kind of starts, I think this is the first one we get revealed. All three members of this trio are under the assumption that they can't go back, which is not necessarily true, but they all, without getting too much as far as, they all end up countering their respective families.
That's right.
And it's surprisingly pleasant for all three of them, but at the end of the movie they're still together. They're still the trio. Right. They're not necessarily going to reject their homes or anything, but they're still a trio. And I think, and I really like that. Even after having this connections, like it. Yeah, I don't know if Jin can really go back to being the father to his daughter he hasn't seen in like 15 years. I think you just slide back into that.
I'm glad they did it too, because at least it'll show that it would be very tragic for them to not address these past like demons that they have in their lives. And what a Christmas motif. I mean, that's kind of like a Christmas aspect of it. Well, is that like it's such a Christmas motif to right your wrongs and confront your demons, and like so at least that's
Christmas Carol stuff.
It really is. It really is. Oh, and the three like of them as well. It may be a parallel to like a Christmas Carol, perhaps. And they encounter, both ghostly figures and straight up dead people in this movie. So, like I said, melancholy is not far from like Christmas motifs classic Christmas motifs that we've seen. So I think that in retrospect of watching it, I was like, yeah, that like it does relate very much so to what we consider as a like Christmas theme, for sure, a dark Christmas theme, but like a Christmas theme nonetheless.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I don't know, because it does address, like you said, most Christmas themes perfectly, but in a very different way.
Yeah.
Yeah. You even do have some beautiful imagery where at the end Hannah is saving the day and is descending like an angel with the baby. One of my favorites. It's a beautiful image. It's funny. It's beautiful, especially with that character who's been talking about miracles the whole time. And
that was the most for me, like throw a bone to the to the miracle wonders of the like wanting that so bad, but I appreciated it. I was like, that is so sweet.
I enjoy Black Christmas, the horror movie, but I also I prefer this, I prefer like there is still like enough true Christmas in this,
there is,
despite everything else. And on that note, like there's a harrowing scene, at least for me, where Jin is just mugged by a bunch of rich young punks who want to go beat up a homeless guy.
Yep.
And that's just there. That's a thing he has to deal with. He nearly dies.
That's true.
So this movie is unflinching, I think, with its look about how we treat homeless people. And even at the end, they have found the baby, who again it turned out was stolen. They initially gave it to the wrong parents. They found the baby. It's reunited with the correct parents, and the parents are excited to go see the Godfathers. And the police weren't like, well, just so you know, they're homeless. Like, that's fine. I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
The fact that the police still think they need to warn them before they go in there. I think
it's so crazy.
There's also I shouldn't say imply, very much a happy ending that happens off screen. At one point, Jin is helping another older dying homeless man. That actually happens right before he is mugged himself. And the dying man hands on something, says it'd be better if they don't know who I am. It's revealed much later in the movie, but not really commented on, that that was actually the winning lotto ticket that he has. So we don't see this, and by the end of the movie, Jin seems still unaware of the fact that he has this. So
That's right. I remember that.
we hope that that's something they put together, because it's a rather large lotto. But it's awesome. That's another kind of fun twist of like the Christmas perfect happy ending where they come into a lot of money but they don't know it yet. So are these idiots going to just throw it away against garbage, or are they going to find out?
Oh, the futility of like the things that happen to them were really, really like well done and like palpable. It's one little slip up is a usually with like an item or like a just some aspect of their of the way their like journey unfolded. It's kind of like not really their actions, it's just like the literally their surroundings around them that cause things to go the way that they do for them, and that is so it's like just so well done.
This is going back to earlier in the movie. There's a moment actually when they have a lead of who the mother could be. I think they have an address, and they're on the train going there, and Miyuki sees while they're stuck on the tracks, Miyuki sees the train opposite her father. It's unclear to us as the audience at this point that that's her father. It's just someone who sees her, they recognize each other, and she panics and she just runs off the train. They are some miles from where they need to go. It's snowing, and Jin and Hana follow her, and they complain about it, but they still follow her. And more importantly, they don't make her tell her what happened. And I really like that detail of, okay, we're still sticking together. I don't know what went wrong. You don't have to tell us, but
here we are.
It's clearly a problem. We went from being warm on the train, we spent money for it, and now we're going back to the snow. But they let that one go pretty quickly. I think, again, without pushing for an explanation, really, at least not too hard enough to get one as to what happened. So I love that detail. I really love their dynamic. And one thing I think this movie has gotten complaints for, which I can understand, is earlier in the movie, particularly when they are having more heated arguments, Jin is intentionally misgendering Hana to irk them. And it's something that stops though as the movie goes on, as they become more collected and in a goal.
That's right.
It's something he drops pretty early on, and I really like that choice. They don't have a conversation about it. They don't have a formal apologies. They don't have a formal acknowledgement. He just stops the bad behavior.
Yes.
And that felt very realistic to me. Not saying that such things should happen without acknowledgement, but I think in real life that's much more likely to happen than a perfectly articulated speech. So
I agree.
I appreciated that portrayal. And also, like, Jin is an old alcoholic man, or I should say a middle-aged. This movie came out in 2003. Jin doesn't need to be woke. He's a homeless guy.
Woke did not quite exist then. And well, I was gonna say, like, I think that is a testament of like the time it was, which is, like you say, 2003. But in a way, that's actually at least Hannah's character for me was quite ahead of its time.
I would say so.
And specifically the way that they band together and treat her is it's hard because it's like both characteristic of its time in terms of like Jin's bad behavior, like you say, but ahead of its time in that I just love that they so sincerely portray their genuine friendships as like messy and chaotic and kind of and cruel and kind of cruel sometimes. And Hannah she's able to like hold her own with it anyway, so it's kind of like no one can touch Hannah in that regard. So it's just I think it's portrayed well and causes like adequate tension in the movie, and like is an aspect of just their character development and character building.
Right.
And it's not a joke. Like her Hannah's transgenderism is not a joke. It's an element of her character.
Absolutely. She's a very fey, she's not a joke. She's not just a punchline. She's a very interesting character, and a character we again find out more of their backgrounds, find out what was going on with her, and it's I think she's a really beautiful character.
I like that none of these characters are jokes. Like they're not taken for granted, which I think that the easiest commentary is just that like the homeless people or people that are experiencing homelessness can often be taken for granted. Their character is certainly not taken into consideration at all, and their their persona is not taken into consideration at all,
Right.
which the movie also portrays.
Well, bottom line, folks, is it's a great and very unique Christmas experience that I recommend. If you love Christmas movies, watch this because it's kind of that. And if you don't like watching Christmas movies for over sentimental reasons or cliche reasons, then this will certainly be the antidote you seek.
So Seth, I have an antithesis
All
of
right.
this movie that it's kind of in the same vein almost, which is interesting. So me and my sister, our Christmas movie like of the year that we were so excited to watch now that, and I got like Disney Plus, so I was like headed to it, is I'll Be Home for Christmas, starring Jonathan Taylor Thomas. Of like it's a late 90s movie, so like in his peak prime of his
Nice.
heartthrob prime. This movie is also a screwball comedy in a very much more like Western sense of the word. And as we were talking about Tokyo Godfathers, it was interesting that like I was seeing more parallels as I like thought about it, because the plot of this very B movie is that he gets abandoned in the desert to try to get home before Christmas at a certain time, so he can literally get a convertible, like a car from his dad.
Okay.
Like a
Wait, his dad abandoned him?
He gets abandoned from punks at his college. They like beat him up.
Okay.
Yeah, for like a very, very dumbed down plot line.
Okay.
And so it's his journey to get back to home so he can get this convertible. So again, like very like antithesis of Tokyo Godfathers, but some very odd parallels, because he goes on a screwball comedy journey that like snowballs into a very like tied in a bow ending that Western Christmas movies tend to do. It kind of like was interesting to me because it held up more than I thought, and more than
Oh,
we
really?
thought. We had a blast watching this movie. It was very funny. And then actually, to like throw it even more back to our previous episode where we were talking about lack of sexuality in Marvel
Yeah.
films, so this, as a late 90s movie, early 2000s movie, actually had a lot of like sex humor in it, which was really fun for us as well. It's very like cheeky. Obviously it's not like
Sure.
it's really not that crazy, but it just reminded me of like our conversation about that. So if you're interested, go and check out our previous episode on that.
Well, that's very interesting, given like, so much of our conversation was about the assumption that Marvel was being desexualized because it was owned by Disney.
Oh my goodness, I
This
know.
is a Disney movie, right?
I think so, yes. Yeah. It
Was
is.
it like Miramax or something?
No, I was trying to remember like that the cards, and it for sure was a Disney movie.
Wow.
But I just don't remember like where it wasn't like a Disney Channel movie,
Sure,
but I think
yeah.
it was produced for sure by Disney. Because I remember the castle card in the beginning.
Right.
The Disney. How
Hard
could
to
you
forget
forget?
that one.
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly. So yeah, no, that is interesting. It very much well, it's like a preteen like screwball comedy that is fun to watch for the, I think again like dark, certainly not as dark as Tokyo Godfathers, but darker themes come up, including like very 90s, not enjoying going home because of like a stepmother incident,
Oh
or
man, that was a big thing in the 90s, wasn't it?
dude. So that's a bit like, that's a great characteristic of like the entire movie basically, is he just doesn't want to go home because of like evil stepmother issues. But it's very fun and very, again, like screwball comedy.
Well, fantastic. I'm going to recommend another screwball Christmas comedy, a lighter, more traditional one.
Oh yes, please.
As well. This is an old movie. I don't know where you can find it. Christmas in Connecticut. I'm a preface. This is not It's a Wonderful Life. This is not Shop Around the Corner. This is not a Christmas classic, and that it's a flat out great movie. It's just a very silly Christmas movie that
Yes.
I rewatched with my wife recently, and we're both shocked that it hasn't been remade because it's peak for the influencer age. The main plot is that a woman who writes for a food columnist, who's a celebrity food columnist, kind of a Martha Stewart, but only in print. No one has seen her and know what she looks like, and part of her column is that she has this beautiful mansion, country house in Connecticut. She's got several kids, has horses and all this. And actually, she's writing this from a New York City apartment. She doesn't know how to cook. She's never been to Connecticut, is getting all her recipes from a chef friend nearby. And the owner of the magazine doesn't realize this and invites himself over to Christmas dinner at her house in Connecticut. So they have to fake all this and fake the cooking and everything. So, and for reasons I won't get into, a very handsome soldier is involved who gets invited as well. And she has to pose with a guy she doesn't like as her husband, but also tries to flirt with the actual handsome soldier. So it's an odd movie that I think is kind of a proto Hallmark movie that involves, the New York,
but much better.
Yeah, I would say so. That involves like dialed up city, a lot. Big city working professional woman who doesn't know how she'll have time to settle down, getting caught up in the lure of Christmas in the country and the under the stars, having a sleigh ride and all this stuff. So a lot of the elements are there. It's just well before Hallmark Channel existed. So kind of an odd, fun piece of cinema history. Also like a proto food movie, because so much of the movie is about food.
Such a good plot line.
Yeah.
It's probably like it's probably would be like a Christmas like set, like a movie set. And oh, sorry to like bring it back to me, Seth, but like that reminded me really quick of that. Part of the reason that I was super happy, at least with my rewatching of like I'll Be Home for Christmas, is 90s movies tend to have this really for me a big element of like why I love film is prop and like set design, but specifically like tangible ones. And the movie had a lot of I'm sure probably Christmas in Connecticut as well has just these fantastic like Christmas-y sets that are are physical and like not a green screen, and they had to go to all these places to get through this like adventure comedy. And that was a big win for me. Like pretty much majority everything was tangible except for like car ride scenes where like the background is like a shitty green screen. But so appreciate, like I eat it up. Like I love stuff like that.
You've actually worked on film sets, right?
I did, yes.
Yeah. So you were handling props, weren't you?
And very low budget film sets like at that. So very tangible. That's just like my bread and butter. Like it really makes me happy. And you can just tell in production when things are real versus when they're not. And Christmas time is a wonderful, colorful, tactile time, I feel like, in film. So I loved it.
I'm glad you brought that up. This is kind of related. I haven't seen the new adaptation of the live action adaptation of Cowboy Bebop, but it's already been canceled, which is a shame because John Cho's great.
I've heard of it.
I'm sure the rest of the cast was, but I understand one of the complaints from viewers was that like all the frames just felt so empty, that like every set just felt so bland and didn't have props, at least not interesting ones. And kind of what you're talking about, which is like, those every frame in that anime, if you've seen it, is really detailed. Everything looks really lived in, is really cool. You have these really fun like casino sets and like even just like a gas station in space. Somehow it looks very intricate and detailed. It feels very detailed and lived in and realistic. And I'm taking a word from others here. Apparently there's just a lot of empty space, among other problems in it that not as avid of a film goer, not noticing it, you might not know what's off, but that could be it. So I think you're right. That's something we might not realize when we're missing it. We know we're missing something, but I think props is an underrated thing.
I think just especially in like the holiday time or like Christmas time, it's like very warranted to have a lot going on.
Absolutely.
I like that you mentioned food too, because like how so much of Christmas movies are like related around the big Christmas meal. So it would be so weird to not have it grandiose in that way.
Well, let's also wrap up our recommendations, since this was a anime movie. I think we're both going to recommend an anime.
Yeah, I would absolutely love to recommend Paprika to you, which is by the same director as Tokyo Godfathers, and a bit of a spin or a different tone for me, definitely, because it's very, very more surreal. I think that's what I had seen Paprika before Tokyo Godfathers, so I was going into it thinking like surreal movie and Tokyo Godfathers, like I mentioned earlier, I thought was a very much more like straightforward plotline and
Hmm.
storyline. It had a lot of like symbolic imagery, which I think that anime does so well, and
Hmm.
is just like far beyond Western. I think that a lot of our Western film discographies basically take and or steal from the motifs that are portrayed in anime a lot of the time. So the movie Inception has ripped off or inspired by, it's like a kind of a fine line there, but
Yeah,
a exact scene from Paprika, and it was so apparent. Like when I watched it, I was just like stunned. So that's something that I didn't know as well as like a Western moviegoer going into it. So if you like that like surreal imagery and insanely beautiful imagery as well, I would totally recommend checking out Paprika for that.
absolutely. Paprika is a fantastic movie, and a couple quick notes on Satoshi Kon. He tragically died at 46. He
Mm,
was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and died months later. So
wow.
they caught it very late. He had several projects he was working on. So we, unfortunately, from this brilliant director, we only have 4 feature films and TV series.
Oh my
Although I think he
gosh.
did some mangas as well, but still a very prolific, or I should say, very influential, despite
Yes.
not being prolific, outpouring. And I know Guillermo del Toro has been very open about being deeply influenced by
Ah.
Satoshi Kon
Mm-hmm.
and has been very open with his praise for him. Darren Aronofsky and Christopher Nolan are 2 directors who people point a lot of similarities out to. We might get into this later. I don't care for Darren Aronofsky that much as a person. I like some of his movies, but he seems like an asshole. And part of that is he's been very much rejecting the comparisons between his movies and
As an
Satoshi Kon,
asshole
even
would.
though they are shot for shot.
Yeah.
Look down breakdowns between Perfect Blue and Requiem for a Dream.
Hilarious.
Perfect Blue did come out earlier, and oddly, I was actually trying to look and see if Nolan has acknowledged that. I couldn't find anything, which I would be baffled because the imagery is so strong. Some of the things that people say are references, I can understand, like how it came up on like scenes in a it's an interesting shot in a bathtub or whatever.
Yeah.
But like this is a hall crumbling while somebody's running through it in a very particular way. This is a woman holding her hand up, and what she touches turns to glass and shatters. Much
Hmm.
like those are really direct things in Inception. So if he didn't see it, his project production designer did and didn't tell him. But
Oh,
I'm sure he's been asked. If anybody does find that, please write in.
I know.
Uh,
We'd love to
film,
hear it.
thefilmoptimist@gmail.com.
Yes, please.
or reach out to us on Twitter or Instagram, also Film Optimist. But
Hmm.
to that note of like, what's the line between ripoff and inspiration or inspired? I think it's acknowledging. You know,
I agree.
another person say what you will about him. Then there's a lot of negative to say Tarantino. Tarantino's always very open about the myriad of movies he's lifting
Mm.
scenes from, and he does something unique with them. I think he puts
Hmm.
them in a different context.
Yeah.
He's not going to act like he hasn't seen the good, bad, and the ugly.
Right.
You know,
Right. Hmm.
so I think that's where I kind of start to get a little concerned about Darren Aronofsky and Christopher Nolan, who Nolan's films I really like. Why would you not acknowledge this?
Especially that it's like Eastern versus Western kind of thing like going on
Right?
here. So it's like,
Absolutely. I frankly don't think it's a fun way to watch a movie or to do film criticism, is to just say
yeah,
that's like this, and so that person's lazy. That's not lazy. That's great.
I know.
We've
Yeah.
been. I think even like Martin Scorsese has said, like Goodfellas, which is widely considered one of his best movies, one of the best movies, is basically just a remake of the Great Train Robbery from like 1910. So
Oh my. Yeah.
it's like, and it's good.
Right.
So
Right.
this is not a new thing in any art form to be
Hmm.
inspired by.
That's another thing too, is just like art imitates art so many times over, many times over. Film imitates film many times over, but it's just like, how about let's acknowledge like where these origins lie, and like
Exactly.
where that's basically it. That's all we want.
And
That's
I
all
think
we
with,
want.
with Paprika especially, it's a on paper a similar plot. The movies
Hmm.
go a very different way, but like a dream machine is involved.
Right.
Characters going into dreams, a
Hmm.
team of people going into dreams, characters not having a clear grasp on whether or not they're in a dream, and if they are, whose. So it's like I do think Inception's a very different movie, but the
Yep.
plot is so similar in terms of elements that like you really have to ask. This isn't just a shot. This isn't
Yes.
just a scene that's
Hmm.
looks the same way. Sorry, your recommendation was Paprika, and I strongly
Yes.
second it. My recommendation for another anime film is The Castle of Cagliostro, also known as Lupin the Third, The Castle of Cagliostro. This is a Hayao Miyazaki movie, but this is not a Studio Ghibli movie. This is predates Studio Ghibli,
Hmm.
and it certainly shows. This is definitely a different movie. I am not too familiar with the massive franchise that is Lupin the Third, but just going on its Wikipedia one day, I was shocked. This has existed in many forms for quite a while.
Mm.
It's been a manga for a long time. I think there's a new movie coming out actually.
Oh.
This character's been around for quite a while. Miyazaki was working on the TV show version of this in the 70s and then did a film adaptation. Um, I'm not that interested in pursuing it beyond this movie. I'll tell you that from what I've looked into it. It's a very funny, strange movie that is, obviously it's Miyazaki, but it's very different than Ghibli. It's maybe not as sentimental. It's a little bit more straight up of a comedy,
Okay.
of an action crime thriller comedy. There's moments in this that is kind of just straight up Bugs Bunny, Marx Brothers shit. It's also going back to food. I think anime actually is one of the best Miyazaki movies. Is maybe movies that make me the hungriest.
Oh yes.
In all of his movies, and this
Absolutely.
is definitely has one of those scenes where two characters are talking about how they're going to break into the castle over a bowl of spaghetti, and it's only one bowl, and they keep grabbing it from each other while having this conversation and eating and talking their mouth full, but it just looks like the best fucking spaghetti.
Right.
It's so that's maybe the biggest Miyazaki trait there. I believe it's on Netflix right now, but
Ooh.
always fun to see a director's early work,
Yeah.
especially someone who has such a refined and established style as Miyazaki. This is a little different. This is a little more loose. And on the Miyazaki, he is coming out of retirement again, so we have that to look forward to.
Ooh, that's very
I think he's
exciting.
retired 2 or 3 times now. So whether or not this is actually going to be the truly last movie,
I was gonna
time will
say,
tell.
I think
But
he's wrestling with that as well.
yeah,
He's been
he
in and
clearly
out of
doesn't enjoy
retirement.
retirement. So,
That's funny.
But
He's
we have that
passionate,
to look forward
folks.
to. He is.
Yeah.
So that concludes our holiday episode, our holiday special.
Hmm. We here at Film Optimists wish you all a very, very happy holiday. Merry Christmas and a happy new year, It's all
Absolutely.
coming fast. It really is, as it does at this time of year. And we wish you an optimistic Christmas. Good talking with you, Seth.
Good talking with you, Megan.
And we will catch you guys next time.